So it's about time we created something using Designer, something usable at the very least, and hopefully something reusable at the best. Now, this is not going to be the most realistic sort of substance, aka result of our work, since of course we're going to have two worms playing volleyball on the beach. What we really need is something rudimentary, something we can probably add into the add to in the future. So I'm going to present you with the most common workflow, which is also my workflow for most things, when it comes to creating a substance. I might go a little bit modular. In other words, I will show you several different methods of doing kind of the same thing, but the reason I will do that is so that you know the principles of how to how to work with that, and then which will allow you to, of course, incorporate that into your own workflow. However, without further ado, we need to first create a graph. Now, of course, remember, ideally, you would want to save yourself the time working in Designer. You want to go ahead and look at substance share, substance source to get the desired result. But on the off chance that you have something that you do not really like, you can't find anything you like, in other words, you might have to make one yourself. So first thing, of course, I'm going to go ahead and create a new substance, and this will be our kind of sand underscore full. The reason I'm using sand underscore full is because this is going to be the sort of like the master graph. This is how I like to work. Not necessarily the only way, nor probably not even the best way. But you want to go ahead and stay as modular as possible. And of course, you need to figure out how modular you want to be, because obviously you can split everything down to single packages. But there are limits, and really there's a fine line between getting too modular and just, getting a little bit too complex as well. So you have to figure out what's your sort of tolerance for that. Now in this case, since this is going to be the master graph, I'm going to set this to absolute, and I'm going to click OK. Now this created our master graph, and currently, of course, we don't have anything of worth in here, and that's completely fine. I'm going to go ahead and create my sand package. So I'm going to say a new substance graph. This will be my sand. This is where we will sort of work on our sand exclusively, right? From this particular graph, we only want the sand. And because this is going to be kind of incorporated into the master graph, I want this to be relative to parent from the get-go. I'm going to click OK here. And this is our sand. Now, since this is not going to be our master graph, I might as well just put this in a folder. So I'm going to say create new folder. I'm going to rename this into utility. I'm going to dump the sand into my utility folder. I'm going to do the same thing, but a little bit later by creating a secondary graph, which will be used in the sand folder. But for now, let's just go ahead and take a look at what we have here. So we need to create some sand. Now in nature, everything, generally speaking, is either a noise or a pattern. By that I mean, or a combination. Well, actually, almost always it's a combination of the two. But what I'm saying is that there's rarely anything concrete. Okay, so if you think about a leaf, you could recognize the pattern of the cells, for example, or the structure of the leaf, but they will be randomly scattered across the leaf, therefore giving it sort of like uniqueness. And that's exactly what you have to break down whenever you're trying to figure something, all right? So whenever you're working onto anything, you have to go back into your basic shape, all right? It's the same process as with Maya and Mudbox and any other really kind of creational process, where you need to start with the macro surface details and then you go into the micro details. You're not going to start with the cracks in the bricks without having the brick wall itself, all right? So that's why you want to go with something as granular as possible, at least something on the macro scale. In this case, we are creating sand. Now, sand is a fairly actually difficult, at least in my opinion, fairly difficult substance to create, mainly due to the reason that there's just so many different configurations of sand that it's not unlike water in the way it behaves. That's assuming, of course, you're going to animate it. Now, we're not going to be animating it, but it's still not, it's still fairly complex. But sand in general is a noise, and therefore we'll go into our noises directory here and we'll take a look at what kind of noises we have. Now, generally speaking, one of the most versatile noises in Substance Designer is a fractal noise, and in fact the fractal sum base. The other fractal sums are just sort of offshoots, like the derivatives of the fractal base. But let's just say, usually that's my approach anyway. I just dump a bunch of noises. So let's say I'm going to grab the directional scratches. What else looks like sand? Blue noise and maybe black and white spots. What else can I take? Dirt. No, there's not a lot of dirt, but maybe I'll take this fat dirt or maybe the small dirt. We'll see. Maybe a dirt gradient. There's loads of different noises really to pick. I think white noise is fairly appropriate. And then I can say, of course, I need a Perlin noise. And I could also use a Gaussian noise, I think. If there's a Gaussian noise here, there's a Gaussian noise as well. I lost the sucker. Where'd it go? There it is. So as you can see, I got loads of noises. Now, which ones do I pick? Well, I'm just going to double click onto each and every one of them and take a look at how they look. Yeah. Of course, we need to change this to a plane since, of course, we will be working. I'm going to say this is a high resolution plane because why not? Or maybe just a regular plane since we're working with 512 after all. Okay. Now, first of all, of course, I could just go ahead and dunk this into one of these channels and take a look how they look. And evaluate the way they look. But in my case, I will simply take a look at the way these noises perform in terms of their speed. Clearly, the fractal sum is the slowest one. Actually, no, the black and white spots is the slowest one. Dirt is sort of fast. White noise is fairly fast. Blue noise is definitely loads fast. And I think it's actually the fastest out of them all. So perhaps we should go ahead and take a look at our blue noise. Now, even though this looks like sand, this is really fine. I mean, it's fairly universally spread out. And, I mean, of course, we could change that. The point is that it's really fine. Now, I could say that this will be the basis of my sort of sand little compilation. The blue noise will be my finest possible grains that I can get, all right? Now, let's take a look. I'm happy with the blue noise, so I'm going to leave this here. Then we've got the, what is this? Gaussian noise. This is a little bit, I don't know. I mean, even if we increase the scale, maybe if we actually this is pretty nice because it'll allow us to control the overall size. Of course, as we increase the scale, so do we increase the speed at which this thing gets sort of computed. But maybe this is a worthwhile noise to be had. So I might leave it over here as well. What about Perlin noise? Well, Perlin noise has the exact same setup. Actually, I'll probably just stick with Perlin noise. It's much better. Although this is black, we could use it as macro details. So, for example, these would be my biggest, all right? So currently I have my smallest and my biggest, sort of grains, okay? Granules of sand. Perlin noise, I really don't know. You might as well use Perlin noise in this case. It doesn't really matter. But I'm gonna ignore that. obviously, scratches, this just doesn't work. I mean, I could perhaps increase the scale of them. Maybe I could squish them in terms of in terms of size or whatever. Maybe something like this. But this is a little bit. I don't think that's exactly what I need. I could, but no. Yeah, no matter how much I look at it, I'm just creating a regular noise at the expense of something else. So I'm going to skip with directional scratches. Let's take a look at the dirt. Now this could be fairly interesting, especially if I sort of increase the disorder, perhaps even scale this up a little bit by 2. These could be some extra little bits here. Maybe this is actually better since dirt is kind of what I'm looking for. Versus the Gaussian noise. However, if I increase the scale, well, I currently increase the scale quite a lot, but let's say I leave it like that. This would be my secondary. My white noise would be actually the middle version in this case if I take a look at it. My blue noise is fairly universal. The white noise is a little bit more coarse. And then we could have another set which would be these two guys, right? So these could be my secondary sets. Now, in order to get a really good result, I might want to blend them together, right? How exactly am I going to blend them together, though? That's the question. Jesus Christ, dirt is very heavy. Okay, maybe I shouldn't use dirt. Very heavy compared to the rest of these noises. Interesting. No, actually, I will not use dirt. Forget the dirt. I'm not going to use this one either. Fractal sum is fine. I could use, for example, something like the black and white spots. Although they're fairly slow themselves. Jesus Christ. All right, these things are very slow. I'm going to use my fractal sum. fractal some base. It gives me a lot of control here. Mainly I'm going to use this as a mask, by the way, since it allows me to, control quite a lot of things when it comes to my, sort of, it'll give us this interesting texture here, okay? Let's go ahead and take a look. First, we got the blue and the white noise. These are our sort of smallest ones. So I want to grab my blue noise and my white noise, and my Gaussian noise, and blend them together. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to type in blend, and simply I'm going to use one over the other. Now, currently, of course, we got the foreground and the background. Now, the background is sort of like the main bit, and the foreground gets blended into the background. Okay, not the other way around. So whatever it is we have, we should use blue noise as our background, and then we should use our Gaussian noise as the foreground, because we want this to be on top of, the blue noise. Okay, so this is a fairly, big, like these are pretty big stones. Let's take a look at what we have. Of course, I'm looking at the bottom left here, not here, because we really don't have anything here just yet. And let's go ahead and take a look at our different blending modes. We could add it, subtract it, multiply, maybe something like overlay seems nice. Actually, overlay seems very nice in this case. Yes, I believe I will use overlay. So overlay is fine. Maybe I could use a mask. So this could be, for example, my mask. What's going to happen if I add that mask? It'll simply add another layer of, basically kind of define the way which I want to blend this together. Maybe I do need a mask here, since I want my Gaussian noise to be a little bit more pronounced. How can I achieve that? Well, I simply make this a little bit darker, like this, and maybe increase the opacity a little bit, and then the roughness, decrease it. Maybe something like this. This will give me sort of this non-universal setup. Now, these are very subtle and not very sort of like impressive results, because there's really not that much happening here, especially considering the fact that I just used the overlay. Maybe I could decrease the opacity, but let's just take a look again what we have. We could even use copy, actually. I believe I'm pretty happy with the copy. This gives me a very interesting effect based on this mask. Of course, I can modify this further, or perhaps even use the levels, but for now I'm going to leave it as it is. Now I want to blend these two together as well, since of course I have a another node here, which would be my white noise. In this case, the white noise would be sort of like the smallest bits, so I really need this to be in the background. So I'm going to blend this again, and I'm going to say, okay, well, we need to dunk this into my background, and we'll blend this with the foreground. Now, how is that going to look like? Clearly not as impressive as I hoped, because there's really rarely any difference, mainly due to the fact that I'm copying stuff over. Let's take a look at what we can have. Maybe we could sort of max this out and lighten it out. So there is a difference between the two, as you can see. This kind of adds extra, but it's a little bit too overpowering. What if I divide? Okay, that's a little bit too overpowering. Overlay, perhaps soft light. Soft light can work. I believe soft light can give me the best possible result, but I could also utilize the use of a mask again. Now, let's say I decide to use the same mask. I'm really not going to get much of a result here, because of course this is a fairly this is pretty much the exact same mask that we're using otherwise. So I could say, well, let's say I use, well, whatever I use, it doesn't really matter. I could say I just use copy. Okay, for now, let's just use copy. Now, what if I want to modify this mask? Like I said before, I've got loads of different options. I've got a levels option. I could use my curves. I could use my histogram, and there's loads of different histograms. But let's say I want to use histogram select. In this case, this is going to give me like sort of a very strong mask. And if we take a look here, this should be reflected on top of the mask. So if I, let's say, increase the range, I should be getting these interesting results here. Change the position. So the more I basically change the position, the more of the grains I'm getting in. And I could even increase the contrast even more. And maybe reduce the range a little bit, so there's not that much. Generally speaking, though, it's not the best idea, but I want the tiniest, like the smallest bits, I want them to be on top of whatever it is I'm working with, all right? So this is probably what I'm looking at right now. However, I do need some opacity changes, since I don't want that many black spots here. Maybe not that many. Something like this, probably. So let's take a look between this histogram and just on its own. Yes, the histogram, I do think it adds a little bit more oomph to my sort of overall texture, right? Of course, there's different blending modes again. I could, again, just scroll through them, see what I get. Perhaps Max Lighten actually is quite well done. Notice that these are small details. Very few players will actually notice this. I'm going to use screen. I think screen, like this would be probably the best possible result, at least the way I see it, right? It's, like I said, it all depends on your personal preference. So let's say I'm going to leave this as it is for now. This is my sand kind of really done. All I have to do afterwards is simply to export it. Now in this case, I've got loads of different things, such as I got my base color, I've got my normal, I've got my roughness, right? Loads of different maps. So I've got two options here. My first option is to simply use this as a master graph and simply export this in all channels. In other words, have this thing be sent to every single channel, convert it to a normal, right? Convert it to everything else. But I don't really want to do that. I simply want to export a grayscale so that I can perhaps afterwards use it. Actually, no, let's do that with the waves. We'll use this with this, with the full output. I want to have a full output here. So what we're going to do first is we need, of course, to create a color. Now, if I dump this directly into the color, let's say I use uniform color, and I dunk this into the color node here. Now, let's say I choose something like this. This is very simple, right? I choose the color and it works. And because I want to do this, I could blend them together, but there's a much better way of performing this procedure just by adding a gradient map. So I'm going to grab a gradient map. And my current gradient map looks very similar to my original picture, sort of grayscale. By the way, you almost always want to be working with the grayscale. You don't want to be working with too much color because it bloats your package. So make sure to stick to grayscale whenever you can. Right? The reason I'm going to be creating this color is because I want to blend the colors at the end in my master graph between the waves and the actual sand, which will allow me to get a little bit more defined sort of result. Again, it's entirely personal preference in this case, but for now, let's just stick to what we know. I need to open up my oh, what the I hate when this happens. Okay, apparently my wallpaper also crashed. That's fascinating. Right, so this is, for example, this is the source image that I found. Now this image, of course, is fairly interesting in terms of its compositions because it's got all the colors that we definitely need. It has a very interesting sort of wave pattern. And one thing we could do, by the way, which is fairly interesting in itself, is if I simply grab where's my test here? My test, and I drag and drop this particular picture on top of, I'm going to link it, on top of this graph, I can use a node called Bitmap to Material Lite. Now, Bitmap to Material is a software package in itself, and it's very, very, very powerful. In fact, it probably makes everything else obsolete. Like, this is the most granular make-it-yourself type deal that you can do. If you go ahead and use Bitmap to Material, let's say you buy the software, which is much more powerful, by the way, than than this simple node here, and dump this here, this will actually be exporting the whole material. So if I go ahead and preview this, view this in 3D view, I will be having pretty much everything that I need. Now in this case, of course, it's got some channels that I don't utilize, so I don't need my diffuse, no specular, no glossiness, no ambient occlusion really. Although let's just say that, well, no, I don't want that. Yeah, and I don't have, by the way, a sort of a color, right? Notice that I don't have a color. Currently here, we'll get normal specular roughness, yes, ambient occlusion. We don't need ambient occlusion, let's just get rid of that for sure for now. Now clearly this does look a lot like regular sand. What's going to happen if I grab this and I drag it over here and I take a look at this, and let's say I grab my gradient map, which would be, let's say I try to add a gradient map to this. So I'm going to create a gradient map. I'm going to make this again sort of color, grab a gradient, and maybe change some of the colors here. For example, from black to sort of orangey, right? And here I want to maybe use some orange as well, maybe some brown, and here maybe I want some yellow in the middle, like this. And over here I want some I don't know, some maybe orange again. So if I dump this over here, we should see a sort of like an interesting position. Now, obviously, this is not ideal. I could, let's say, grab the, for example, my I don't know, my height map maybe. If I go just to 1 and use my height map here, change the gradient. Okay, it mapped it to the gradient. All right, well, that's quite annoying, but as you can see, I can do that. Another option would be to just grab this and dump it into my color channel. Clearly, this creates a very good sort of material, which is usable. Look at this. This is almost immediately usable. Let's say you're making a, I don't know, an underwater game. This could be the bottom of your beach. Sorry, the bottom of your sea. It's very, very powerful, very robust. Again, it's not the best, since even though you do have a lot of options here. Notice that you've got all these instance parameters in terms of like relief. You can invert a lot of stuff. You can, you know, change the normal strength. Look at all these settings, and these are just for the node itself. If you have the software, you can really get great results out of pretty much everything on the internet. And this basically means that you have an infinite supply of materials if you know how to work with bitmap to material. Highly, highly recommend you buy that software. I'm not going to go over it because it's fairly simple once you understand how the designer bit works, right? Since you understand how your channels work, etc., levels, you know, blending modes, etc. You can definitely get a lot of bang for your buck, especially considering that it's such an easy and small software. It's just insane how they managed to get it to work so, you know, so flawlessly. Now, I'm not going to do this particular bit over here, since, of course, you could, by the way, even further, this could be a jumping point, right? You can start modifying whatever it is you're trying to do. Take a look at the normal map, or maybe the, or maybe the roughness, excuse me, or even the metal. Of course, there is no metal, since there's not, you know, this isn't exactly metallic. But you could get, like I said, a lot of mileage for, you know, a very simple couple of clicks. I'm going to delete this, of course, since I don't want to do the lazy way, which, by the way, might even be better than the final result again. Jeez, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's go back into our gradient map. Now, how can I get a gradient which would be sort of representable of what we have here without actually, you know, going ahead and clicking into all of these? Very simple. There's a little feature in Designer which is very powerful, and that is, if you take a look here at the bottom, I've got a pick gradient. Now, this immediately turns your cursor into a sampling tool, and you can sample any pixel on your monitor. It doesn't matter on which window it is. So let's say I could sample everything on here, and I will get a gradient corresponding to this. Or I could sample, for example, this picture from one side to the other, and I will get a gradient key for every time the value of the gradient has actually changed. So this is a fairly cool tool. Obviously, depending on what you sample, you get a different result. But let's just say that that's exactly what I want. I'm going to just minimize this and maximize this bit like this. And let's see what's going to happen if I dump this into my universal color. Well, this is a really good gradient, I think. We're actually looking at, like, this looks like sand, right? I mean, just the color. Ignore the ignore the metallic and all that, because clearly sand does not reflect like a mirror. But for now, we have a really good gradient, so I'm just going to keep this right next to it so that we can follow what we're doing here. So my gradient is very well done. However, I still need a normal map. Even though this is sand, it still has texture, right? Very simple. All I got to do is grab a normal conversion, connect the conversion essentially to the output, which is over here, and grab my blend result and dunk it into my normal map. Now, immediately, this gives us a lot more detail, and this does look a lot like sand, don't you think? I mean, this is currently 512. If I increase the resolution, this will definitely look much better. I believe we're currently at relative to input. Oh, sorry, my bad. We're relative to parent. Why are we relative to parent? All right, because we'll be dumping this into, all right, never mind. So as you can see, we've got our two maps already done. Now we need a roughness, metallic, and height. Now, generally speaking, sand really doesn't have any height, right? I mean, it's not that, like, it's not high at all. So we could, let's say, create a universal color, and I'm gonna say that this is a grayscale, and I'll simply tell it that it's 128, which is sort of like flat in this case. Take a look here. This is flat. Right? You'll see that this is flat because if we go ahead into our materials and edit the sort of the height scale, because currently it's 0, I will be editing it, but there's really no change. Now, what's going to happen if I make this 0? This will go even further down. White is further up. So 0 is kind of like your 0. 128 is like your 0 in terms of a height map, all right? So just so you know, whenever you decide to do something like this. Of course, this is ridiculous scale, so I'm not really going to use it. Actually, I should probably just dump it to 0 again, because I don't want to use it just yet. Then we've got left the metallic and the roughness. Now, sand itself is fairly rough, right? So if I just go ahead and dump this here, we will have some problems in terms of roughness. Not because the roughness map is bad on its own. It's actually fairly universal, these rough spots. But there are actually black points here, which do create, I mean, you don't really see, oh, there we go. They do create this reflective bit. And yes, while we do want it to be fairly rough, and we do want it to reflect some light, we don't want it to have spots which are like completely reflective, like completely polished, even though theoretically a lot of the sand is polished, but you know, that's up for debate. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a histogram, and I'm going to say this is a histogram, I don't know, shift I think could do it. No, shift is not going to do it. We need a histogram range, I believe this will work. The range isn't going to work. Yes, the range will work. So this will make stuff a little bit better. As you can see, I've removed a lot of my black spots. So let's take a look at the difference. So this is before, right, and after, right? Before and after. So a lot of this light actually doesn't, it shouldn't be reflected very much, because this is a, you know, like again, sand is a fairly coarse sort of thing. That's why sandpaper exists. Clearly, this is our control for the, you know, for the roughness. So the higher this position is, the rougher the object is going to be. The lower it is, the less rough it's going to be, like an entirely polished sand. It's kind of wet sand. So we could leave this on here so that whenever we decide to tweak this, we only need to change some of these sliders, and we will get some really nice, obviously the range bit here allows us to sort of pronounce these dark spots. But I'm going to keep it at, let's say, I don't know, something like maybe 0.61 or whatever, and I'm going to increase the range here so that it's a little bit rougher around the edge. It still has some light, as you can see. There's definitely some light here, but it's not overwhelming. Not to mention that we currently don't have a metallic map. So how are we going to perform that? Very simple, I believe. If we put this over here, this will immediately say, obviously, everything white is fully metallic, everything black is fully non-metal. However, sand is dielectric, so we're really not going to get much of a mileage out of this particular substance if we leave this the way it is. So I will simply invert this. My bad, I need to invert grayscale. I don't want to have a lot of nodes here. So once I inverted my grayscale, as you can see, there's still some metallic bits here, and you could argue that maybe the metallic bits, a little bit metallic, of course, very slightly, will reflect a little bit of light. The idea is, at least behind in my thinking, of course I could just say this is a universal color, just like this, and have no metal at all. But I don't know, maybe this has some interesting, weird setups, right, in terms of its sort of what kind of minerals are inside this. These granules, some granules could be cobalt, nickel, or something. I don't know, whatever. You know, microscopic level. This is just a little bit overkill because, like I said, nobody's really going to care or notice this. But at the end of the day, it's important that you have something that looks at least believable. Okay. You could do the same, by the way, for your height. Now, generally speaking, of course, you want your height to be sort of neutral for your sand so that you can modify it with something else. But you do want some variation for these granules, so to speak. So let's go ahead and try to do this. First of all, I will delete this universal color, and I'm going to dunk my initial result into my height. Let's go ahead and pump this up and see what results we're going to get out of that. I'm going to put my height at maybe 0.1, and as you can see already, we're getting this ridiculous sort of breakdown in our texture. Now, I could maybe leave it like that, but this doesn't really look that good either way. So this is a very small height difference, and you have to really look to notice it. Oh, currently it's 0, by the way. You have to really look to notice it, and even at 0.1, it doesn't look that good. So I need something more pronounced in terms of height, something that actually gets blurred in or blurred out. So if we take a look at our output, this is a lot of height. Everything white is fully like max height, and everything black is max not height. we don't really need that. So we might want to maybe dunk this here in the height as well and see what happens. Now in this case, we have very little height, but some height nonetheless. Let's go ahead and use our height here again. As you can see, this is a lot more forgiving in terms of our height, but it does create something, maybe something like this actually is fairly usable. Problem is, we're now using our invert grayscale here, for both things. So whenever we decide to change the histogram here, we might actually get a problem. So what you really want to do is use this one here, and then you need to add another histogram range. Or you could perhaps add a blur. Let's say, what's going to happen if we add a blur? Now the blur obviously is going to create these big lumps, but that's probably exactly what we need. Sand doesn't exactly stick out on its own. It sort of connects, not connects, but like piles up in these lumps of sand. So I'm going to blur this thing, and once I blur it, we should get a fairly interesting result, because now there's really nothing that is super high or super low, and I could even reduce the intensity of it, or maybe even increase it, see what happens. But I'm going to leave it at 10 for now, and we're going to go back into our material. I'm going to pump some of this height up. Clearly, we're not getting anything as severe as before. So even at height, let's say at maximum height, we're only going to get a few bumps here and there. So if I go ahead and just, let's say, intensify this, so reduce the intensity, we'll see that as I reduce the intensity, we're going to get more and more of this height information sort of popping up. It's not the best, honestly. We could do without it, but maybe something like this. Like this is sort of all right. Not to mention that, of course, after the blur, you could have some levels, maybe, or before or after the blur. Of course, it depends on what you're working with. But in my case, I think it'd be much better if I had it before the blur and I added maybe a levels even. I mean, the levels are just a sort of like a good enough way of working with whatever it is you're looking. So let's just say I blow some of these whites up to create some more white sort of data, and I want to increase my contrast so that my whites are not as ridiculous. So this will create bigger blur dots in my blur, final blur. As you can take a look, I'm increasing this, and my white dots, if I actually reduce the blur a little bit, I'll be getting more white dot variation. Of course, I don't want to blow up all my white. Maybe I want to reduce my overall white output so that it's not as obvious. And maybe I want to bring some of my blacks as well. My overall blacks shouldn't be that deep. So something like this, perhaps. As you can see, a lot of this is really trial and error or personal preference, whichever way you want it to sort of to hold. Clearly, this is a very small variation, but hopefully somebody will notice it, right? I mean, you can see it's using parallax occlusion, so it's sort of visible. Really hard to make it look properly though from here. Maybe if we used, let's say, a cube, this should be a lot more apparent. Maybe, I don't know. Let's go back into our plane anyway, since of course this is what we'll be working with. Now currently, as you might imagine, our sand is created. We really don't have much else to do with this. This is a uniform sort of result, so we need to add some variation to it. And this requires our waves. Now, first of all, let's take a look at our sand full, which is going to be our final compilation of our sand. If I go ahead and drag the sand here, you will see almost immediately that I have my composition. What could I do? I could simply drag these and dunk them here, and I will have my same output. The idea, of course, is, and we also see it only takes 12 milliseconds to load this up, which is extremely fast for substance levels. Usually there's some substances that take up to a second even. Now this is a very fast substance, which is good. Of course, we're only using very few nodes. We're not using a lot of blurs, a lot of that, a lot of this, and all of them are grayscale, so we don't really have to bother with too many issues. Let's go back into our sand just to give it a quick scan. We have everything in order, very readable. Of course, you can change that like this. Sometimes I prefer it like that, sometimes not, depends. And it's very readable, it's very easy to read, but still, let's go ahead and create our first comment, sort of. I'm going to create a frame. I'm going to say, this is my sand. Basic sand sort of texture. So this is my basic sand texture. Maybe not the best sort of placement here. Like this, maybe. Okay, the perfectionist in me is now starting to annoy me. Why do you not want to get stuck Right. Let's just leave it as it is. Okay, now that's really annoying now. I'm sorry, guys. I just had to. Let's go. Let's go. Oh, there we go. I think. Okay, let's not go too crazy. Can you just move? Yes. No. Yes. Okay. Let's just let's just ignore. Please ignore that. We could actually, by the way, click here and change the color to yellow because, well, we're working with sand, so might as well. Of course, we can use a color picker and just pick this one. Yes, that's the color that we'll be using. Okay, that's a little bit too overpowering. Just use this yellow bit. In fact, I want to maybe change the B and the alpha. I don't want it to be that bright. So this is our sand. Done. Now we need to create the waves. Clearly, we need to create a new substance along the way. However, this time I'm going to create an empty substance because I don't want to create another one where I got 5 channels, right? This is a ridiculous amount of channels for something as simple as waves, since we only need the grayscale out of it, right? We don't want to be painting the waves. Well, we could, but we won't. We'll paint the waves at the end. We only want the grayscale in order to overlay it on top of whatever it is we have here, right? In fact, to be fair, we could basically only use the grayscale over here and do the same procedure into our final full sand, and we could do that at the end if we so choose. However, I'm going to leave it as it is for now, and I'm going to click on empty relative to parent, and you know the same thing is going to be applying here. I forgot to name it. I'm going to call this waves. And one more thing. Notice that we're calculating the outputs here. In other words, we're computing the outputs, all right? That's important not to do. We only want to do this on the main graph. So I'm going to say no to this one. And of course, no to this one. Only the sand underscore full should have this on, okay? Because the sand underscore full is the stuff we'll be actually importing into Unreal, and that's the stuff that'll be performing all of the operations. We don't want these to be cluttering up all the time. Now we're currently in the waves, and we pretty much got nothing really. It's just empty space, and that's not too good, is it? I mean, we do need some kind of output. But before we go for the outputs, let's go ahead and create some waves. So let's create some waves. First of all, we need to create. All right, let's just create an output, just real quick, one output. I'm not going to define anything about this, just a single output, nothing fancy. Now we need to go into our library and take a look at something else. Now waves, like I said before, are they're like a pattern, aren't they? In like, especially if you look in deserts, etc. There are like a pattern, a lot like it. So maybe I could use an anisotropic noise. Could I? Maybe not. No. Well, maybe. I'm not sure. Like this could be useful or maybe not useful. Maybe I should decrease the X value. That's too flat, too straight. Something like this. Maybe. I don't know. We'll leave this for now here. I don't know how useful this is going to be. Let's go ahead and take a look at something else. These are noises. We're really not going to get much. Oh, look, there's actually a wavelength here, a waveform, but that's not going to do much good for us in this case as well. What about this grunge map? This looks a little bit realistic. These are kind of like waves, if you think about it, right? These are sort of random striations of our waves. So maybe we could start with that. But then again, if you think about this, this is really not, this is a little bit too pronounced. And these kind of look more like cracks in a mountain or something, like in stone. We could definitely use them, but we need to blur the shit out of this thing. Plus, I want a little bit more control over it. Let's go ahead and take a look at patterns. Maybe I can get something in the patterns bit here. What do we have? A star shape. We've got some, I don't know. Oh, we got a shape. Okay. What's the shape here? Oh, take a look at this. They got loads of different shapes. That's pretty cool. So let's say I got a disc. Bell. Wow. There's good shapes here that you can. Oh, gradation. Oh, we got waves. Oh, a ridged ball. All right, this is definitely a very powerful generator, but I just found out about it, and I'm afraid I might not get anything good out of it. I mean, I could, but how am I going to manipulate these? And this is not really going to give me that much of a sort of maybe it could. Maybe it could. If I had something like this. Just, I don't know. Let's keep this for now as well. Let's take a look at something else. What else do we have here? Now, if you think about it, the waves are generally sort of, they're not universal. Some of them are more to the inside, more to the outside in terms of the apex. So they're kind of like, they have a gradient fall off. So we do need a gradient, some kind of gradient. Let's take a look at this one. Well, this does look like a wave, right? I mean, if you discount the fact that it's straight, it does look like a wave. But there's no way to move the wave on its own. Let's take a look at another gradient. What if I tile this a bunch of times? It's actually pretty cool. I could use this. It's very nicely blurred. What about the last one? What if I tile this guy? It doesn't look, it looks the same, doesn't it? Oh, take a look at this. This one actually has a position. All right, so I think this is great. I think this is just the right thing that we need, since this allows us to move the apex of the wave, okay? This is great. We could even rotate this at 90 degrees if we want to. That's amazing. This is the perfect start, I think, for what we need to do. I'm going to leave these two since I don't think I'll ever need them. And I don't know about this... I don't know about this sort of noise, but let's start with this. This is our beginning sort of starting shape. Now, currently, of course, this shape does not perform the the results that we need because it's kind of steady. So we need to modify this somehow. Let's use a warp, since we do need to warp them, right? This doesn't need to be straight. It has to be sort of round and about. So let's use a directional warp. Obviously, we want a particular direction. We don't want to be just warping them all over the place. We want it to warp them at a particular point. Let's use the shape as as the intensity. Let's see what happens. Currently, of course, this warp is... We need to actually turn this somehow. And this is our warp. Now, this shape does not really perform exactly what I want it to perform. Maybe I want to tile this. No, I don't want to tile this. What if I sort of scale this up? Maybe something like this. We are getting something now. We are getting something. What if we tile this again? No. Something like this. Maybe we want to increase the size as well. Yeah, this might be interesting. What if we rotate this? It's an interesting little warp, isn't it? It kind of creates what we need. However, and for some reason, this isn't as big as I really want it to be. I want it to be maxed out. And what if I say 2? Okay, that's a little bit too strong. Yeah, something like this maybe. My final result is, well, not inspiring. Okay, well, this is a little bit of a warp, but it's still not good enough, right? We're getting something. This is not universal at this point, but this shape is not really performing what I need it to do. Let's try something else. What about these circles? Because if you think about this, right? If you think about this, these circles, so to speak, are kind of deforming the way the waves look, because they're not straight, right? These waves are kind of circular. So we do need to define this using the circles. Let's go ahead and try this then. I am getting some deformation. Actually, I might be a little bit... I think I'll use this, actually. Maybe if I tile this enough times... Yes, this could be fairly interesting in terms of its... Let's try a different angle. Yes, I believe this might be useful for us in the long run. Right, now I need to warp this again, since I'm not a big fan of this anyway. Let's go ahead and add another directional warp. Oops. And there we go. This directional warp needs to break this thing in a lot more sort of brutal fashion. This is fine and all, but definitely not producing the result that I need, especially since I'm not a big fan of this tiling. This is much better. Much better. Maybe I could even... Much better. Much better, right? Don't you agree? I think this is a lot better from before. Now, when it comes to this initial one, we do need to warp this in terms of its overall sort of impact. So let's take a look at noise. We do need some noise in that. Remember, it's a combination of both noise and pattern. You can't just have the pattern or just the noise. You need to combine them. So let's find something that kind of represents... Actually, wait. We do have this bit, right? No, that's just the output. Maybe we could use this to bend it. What's going to happen if I add this here? and then simply turn this around. Oh, God, no. Okay, this is a little bit too extreme. That is ridiculous. Definitely not. Although this does create an interesting solution. But no, I'm not definitely happy with this. We need another setup. I'm going to leave this on since I do think I'll get to use it at something, for something. I'm sorry, guys. I'm kind of freestyling it here, so I'm not sure what I'm going to get. And I'm trying to not to, not to stay for too long in a particular object and just move on. But I don't want it to look like shit at the end anyway. So let's use these crystals. I think these crystals can really get the job done here. Let's take a look. So these are our crystals, my directional warp. Now this creates a fairly interesting effect, doesn't it? Especially if I increase the intensity. This kind of ripples them around. And these crystals, maybe if I increase the disorder of them, yes, I believe at disorder 2, I could get some fairly interesting results. Although we are getting some problems here, maybe I should blur this out. Or actually use a sort of a levels here to control what kind of input and output I want. Maybe I should bring these closer together first of all to make this more pronounced. Yes, make it more pronounced. Something like this. Now this is actually maybe not the best possible way of approaching this. What if I blur this at the end? I don't want to have too much white. Actually, I'll keep the black here. And maybe if I shift the gamma more towards the black, maybe something like this. Quite interesting in terms of the way this thing is approached. Maybe if I add a blur as well here. Oh, okay. All right. So we've gotten to something that looks acceptable. Maybe we can even change the sort of the intensity of this and actually work with what we've got. Yes, I am happy. Wow, this looks good. This legitimately looks good. All right. Now we're talking. Now look, we could, for example, I could keep going and try to break these down. For example, if I use this as a mask in a particular blend and try to sort of break this down and maybe use this or transform this and create these sort of cuts across, maybe I should do that. Let's try to do that. Let's see what we have here. We got our pattern specific setup here. We'll use this as a cutoff. Reduce the size like this. In terms of scale, we do want to max this out. So maybe something like this. What about if we have this at 2? Oh God, okay. Maybe not that high, but something like this should be sort of all right. I really don't know what I'm doing right now, guys. I'm just kind of winging it. But as you can see, I'm getting some results, so that's pretty cool. What if I want just a square expansion? All right, this creates an interesting sort of result, doesn't it? Especially if I have these at the same sort of position here. I could use these and cut across these ones here just by using a particular blend, or maybe I could even simply warp across them. Let's use another warp, just a regular warp this time. Don't want to go too gung-ho about it, right? So let's just use this one and just warp them across. Oh my God. That's a little bit too intense. So what we need to do is reduce the intensity. And we are getting, I think we're getting really good results. If only this wasn't just so freaking steady. I believe maybe if we tile this once or twice. What about now? Oh, wow. No. I believe one tile is quite enough. Then we add a blur to it then. What then? Wow, this actually looks really good, I think. These do look like waves, don't they? Especially if I increase the intensity, it really jags them out. Now, there's a little bit of a problem here with this warp, of course, and that is the fact that if we take a look, this is very, very strong in terms of its output. I should probably organize these before I lose them. And this probably doesn't need to be directional at all. Well, maybe it does. Maybe something like this. Let's see, by the way, if our sort of apex control actually works here. Let's change our position. Well, what do you know? We're moving our waves up and down. That's amazing. That's exactly what I wanted. That's great. I'm very happy with this result. Now, currently, we really don't have much in terms of outputs. I think I'm just not going to use this anisotropic noise because let's face it, I've been at it long enough. Of course, there's never enough. You could always keep adding and keep adding and keep adding. You will always get to a point where you'll find a point where you can improve. Let's use this one though. I'm kind of curious how I could get this one to work. Now clearly, this is. We could use this to break these down, right? It definitely makes a lot of sense if I could break these down. So let's try again. Let's try another warp. Maybe directional warp. Oops, directional warp. Another directional warp, and we'll grab this, and we'll also warp this like so. Okay, perhaps we need to rotate this, so I'm going to transform this guy and rotate this by 90 degrees clockwise. And here I'm going to simply invert this to get it a little bit more of a warp situation and reduce the sort of the impact, maybe give it a bit of an angle here. Maybe inverting it was a bad idea, so let's just revert it. There's a lot of striations here and there, right? It does create a lot of issues when it comes to a warp, especially if I decide to, let's say, change the angle of it. Maybe something like this. It does create these interesting sort of lengths. Kind of like a badly defined sort of situation. Maybe I could increase my my balance here and maybe reduce the contrast. But if I invert it, no. Something like this. Yes, actually, this is pretty cool. I could even rotate this guy in a very different fashion, such as this. Now, this should create very weird results, because we've blown up pretty much everything, so we could probably reduce the balance. Yes, it does make a lot of sense. Now, only if we could only blur this out by using a what? A blur. Yes. Yes. Is it different? Yes, it is different. Very slightly, but that is because our intensity is ridiculously high. Yes, I am happy with this. I believe I'm very close to sort of a good result. I'm getting a lot of striations though. Maybe I should increase the contrast here. No. Like this. Maybe change the angle at which these things warp. Look, we'll leave it for now, okay? I definitely think there's more use to be gotten out of this guy. Just got to figure out a way to use him properly, okay? I could even blend with that. In fact, what's going to happen if I blend with that? Now, here's an interesting question. Let's delete this and blend these two together. Well, there's my warp. I'm going to dunk my warp into the background, and I want my sort of blur type deal go into the foreground. Actually, I don't need this this blur here, not yet, because I want to see what my final result is going to be based on this foreground. Oh my god, ridiculous. Let's add these two together, see what we get. Oh wow, oh wow. Well, this could be interesting, especially if I rotate this, maybe the soft light, but this doesn't really look that good, at least not yet. I need to kind of maybe rotate this back a little bit to see a bit better of a result, something like this. Just a bit of a breakdown. And then here, I think I should reduce my balance. Maybe I could even use that as a map here, as a sort of like an opacity map, right? Let's go ahead and do that then. Maybe I could use this as an opacity map. I want to use just these bits here. I think I'm getting a fairly good result if I could only also maybe add a little bit of a blur here. Kind of, I feel like I'm kind of married to this blur, right? This does create an interesting result, though. I think we can use that. Now that we have that, clearly, by the way, you can see how our warp has been done, and maybe this pattern is a little bit too visible, at least these straight lines, but I'm not going to bother fixing that at least just yet, all right? So let's just put this on the outside, and this is everything that we really needed. And I'm going to say that this is our sort of waves done, okay? So I'm going to say these are our waves. Oh, they're blue as well. That's very nice. Wave generation. Okay, excellent. Waves done, sand done. Now we need to output this damn guy, right? Well, here we come to a crossroads. First of all, we could grab an input grayscale. Actually, before we do that, let's just output it the way it is right now. Let's just say I'm going to output this like so. Currently, we have an output that is a grayscale. Currently, however, it also does not have a usage and it doesn't have an identifier. Now, if I add a usage to it, we could say that we want to use it for a particular thing, such as maybe a bump or height. There's really not a lot of difference. Displacement, specular, roughness. Look at how many different things you've got. But any, right? It could have any use. So let's just say this is an any use sort of output, right? I'm gonna label this grayscale, right? I'm just gonna copy this over to the label. No group, since we only have one. And let's see what we have when we go into Explorer. And currently we go into our sand full. This is our sand full. Grab our waves. By the way, since this is not in our library, if you say and write down waves, you're not going to get it. You need to import it into your library if you want to get it from your spacebar. There we go. There's our waves. Okay. Currently, it has one output, which is the waves, and no real way of controlling it. So how can we approach our little problem? We're going to have to blend an awful lot of stuff here if we want to make this work. So I will need 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 blend nodes, if I want to get this to work, which is quite a waste of, of sort of processing power. Therefore, we will use an input. We simply need to run an input with a particular blend over here to get the right output. So generally speaking, if this is our grayscale sort of output, I'm going to say blend, and I need well, I'm going to select this blend. Well, I'm actually going to grab an input first. So we need an input grayscale, right? Since we'll be blending with the grayscale, okay? I'm going to say input grayscale, and I'm going to say, well, we want this input to be blended with what we currently have right now. Very, very, very intuitive in my opinion. Okay, so obviously we have to go over here at the foreground, since the foreground will be blended on top of the background. The input, of course, is ours, right? Now, because I can't really tell what I'm going to get, I might want to, for example, get a different control set if I want to really work with this. But for now, let's just say I want to overlay this and see what happens. Currently, we're not really going to get the results since we don't have the input being inputted here. So let's go back into our sand full. In fact, let's go back to just regular sand. Actually, let's just use the sand full, yeah. So as you can see here, I have something, and it's whatever, right? It has any use, and its output is a grayscale. Whatever it is, it's a grayscale. It can be used for anything, right? I can simply grab it and dunk it into any of these guys. Can I? This should work, but it doesn't. Quite unfortunate. Maybe we need to change the usage after all. At any rate, we're not really going to be dunking it anywhere here since we need to colorize it. But let's say we use our sort of base color. Actually, we might want to just use this in the actual sand itself. Over here, right after our blend, I'm going to delete all of these references, and I'm going to add this waves here. And this is my input. I'm going to dunk this over here, and we're going to take a look, and boom, we've got a wavy output. Now, this is not the best blending mode, right? And if I go ahead and hook these up again, we're definitely not going to get, okay, I definitely need to go back into my waves and change my parameters, at least when it comes to my output. Let's say this is a, what's going to happen if I just delete this? Are we going to have a use for the damn thing? We should. Yeah, okay, so if I don't have a usage, it will be able to stick to any. All right, fine. So let's just use this any output and hook them up. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. Well, the waves do look presentable, definitely. However, we've got loads of problems here, okay? That is mainly due to the fact that we kind of dropped the ball when it comes to our, comes to these two things here. First of all, if we take a look at our normal map, it doesn't look nearly as good as it should be looking. And if we take a look at our roughness map, it's pretty good, but there's a lot of darkness here. Mostly the problem lies with the blending mode that we're using. Now, do I have to really go ahead and dive down into my you know, my waves every time I want to change the blending mode? You know, go ahead over here and grab a blending mode? Probably not. I also most likely should use a blending mode and use only this here as a map. I don't want to be blending. Well, I do technically want to be blending, but I only want to use this as a map for the foreground to be dunked on top of the background. So I'm going to use this itself. I don't want to be transferring the black dots here. Okay. So whatever is at the bottom, I want this to be on top. The black bit is irrelevant, right? So I will use the white ones. So let's take a look at the current result. It's a little bit better, right? Actually, it's actually pretty good, but I still would like to see, you know, different methods. Let's take a look at what we have here. Yes, so now it's a much better sort of application. Previously, if you remember correctly, we didn't have a mask. In this case, I'm going to go back into my waves and delete the mask and go back into my sand, and you should see that it is much more pronounced. All right. Now, I could say that this is probably for the best. I could use this the way it is right now. I could use it the way it is the other way. However, there's also a much easier way to approach this without actually having to need this. First of all, we could go into our waves, right? And we can define an input and use it as a mask. Very simple. Obviously, in this case, we might want to, for example, be using something from here. But most importantly, we want to have our blending modes to be available to us, including the opacity. So how can we do that? Very, very simple, my friends. Just right click and say expose parameters, and we can expose these parameters to the hierarchy. Currently, we want to be using our blending mode, and we want to be using our opacity. We don't want to bother with the rest of these. I'm going to say that these are my blenders. Obviously, you can name it whatever it is you want, but by naming this blenders, it allows me to say, well, this is the blender's opacity and blending mode. I'm going to say okay. And currently, if I double click here, I will have a input parameters by blender's opacity, and blender's blending mode. Generally speaking, this is probably not the best label here, so I could say, well, I want to name this sort of wave opacity, wave blend, well, opacity, because it's in the blenders section. So there's my wave opacity, and then of course we go over here and I'm going to say wave blend mode. Notice one interesting moment here, by the way. Currently our blending mode is set as a slider. So I could change my blending mode by driving the slider up and down, but I don't have a drop down. Now, if I really wanted to have a drop down, I would have to go ahead and select a drop down list. However, the drop down list itself needs to be configured by yourself, which means that you have to add every single blending mode and then name it based on the value that, you know, this particular blending mode corresponds to. For example, in this case, if I go ahead and take a look here, I've got my blending modes. So my first blending mode would be copy, second add, third subtract, fourth multiply, etc., etc. You'd have to basically recreate this entire list, which is quite a pain in the ass. Therefore, I elect not to do it, and I will simply leave this as a slider. Okay, very, very simple. Plus, you know, we only have one. We could just go through them and see whichever one we will like in terms of its sort of capability. Okay, so let's go back into our sand and see what we get right now. Okay, now we have something we can work with. There's our blenders. We got our wave opacity and the blend mode. Currently, it's set to copy, and we're getting something like this. The copy bit essentially means that the top gets projected down to the bottom. We're not getting a very good result. And we need to increase the blend mode to something more appropriate. For example, oh, I don't know. Maybe something like this. I don't know which blend mode this is, but it definitely looks appropriate to me. Well, maybe the sand is not as good. Maybe we need to actually go ahead and blend something on top of it. Wow, this actually looks pretty good. Well, I mean, it's a little bit blown up, but if I reduce the opacity of it, maybe I could get something more appropriate. I don't know. Max the opacity out again. This is pretty good, right? Take a look here. That's actually pretty legit. The only problem, of course, lies in the fact that we've just created a very metallic surface. So we need to not only invert this grayscale, now we also need to modify this. So our histogram range needs to sort of accommodate this new input, and this will this is very simply done by increasing its sort of range, like this, even more, and like this. Right, and then over here we have our normal map, our height map, which creates an interesting result, by the way. Speaking of results, we could use that as well. Look, generally speaking, we don't want any metallic here in that particular sense. We don't want our grayscale to be grabbed from this. We want our metallic to be sort of only on, or maybe not. We could use that. We could use that, yes. Definitely use that. Fairly rough stuff, though. Fairly rough stuff. And then we've got our normal map, which looks, honestly, it looks disastrous, in my opinion. Yeah, something like this. Here in the color, our gradient, well, it looks pretty good. I don't know. To me, this looks sort of all right. This is acceptable to me to a particular degree. Not to mention that here we can actually modify a bunch of new things. If you remember, we used the blenders, but there's other controls that we could definitely expose. First of all, over here in the gradient map, how many of these do we want? Very simple. Increase the tiling, get a different result. Decrease the tiling, get no results, right? So we could start with maybe 5 by default, and I'm going to expose this one. Actually, I'm going to expose all of them. So I'm going to say expose parameters, the tiling, the position, and the rotation, and I'm going to put them in a waves category. I can even add a particular suffix, for example, waves for example, waves, oh, I don't know, gradient tiling. So this is our gradient tiling. And then we could maybe even add some other stuff in the suffix, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to click OK. I've exposed 3, okay, right now. Then what else do I have? I could perhaps work with the blur, but I really don't want to do that. The directional warp, nah. The warp here, no. Maybe the blending mode, no, not really. Really, the only thing I want to do is here. And generally speaking, we could define an input which essentially creates the mask itself. So I could do that, or I could just select something like, for example, this, if I want to mask out only the big bits. Maybe I could just use this as a mask and simply grab a levels here to define how visible this mask is going to be. Actually, not a levels, my bad, a scan, a histogram scan. Let's take a look here what we've got. Currently, we've got no position, no contrast. We can increase the position. We're going to dial up the the way this mask performs. And we can, of course, increase the contrast and maybe even add a blur to it, which is going to be really cool. So let's just say, I'm going to say, well, we want to add some blur to my overall results. So I'm going to say blur as well. So I've got loads of different methods of controlling this now, and these two are going to be my primary control sort of points. So this will require me to kind of expose these, right? And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to say expose parameters, and we're going to use the position. We could even invert this. So look at how many controls we've got: position, contrast, and of course, invert position. And then we've got the prefix, which is going to be, of course, waves, since that's what we want. And we want our histogram. This is going to be our histogram position, where it is going to be the sort of mask, position mask. So I'm going to say okay. And now I'm going to expose my blur as well by simply clicking here. I'm going to say blender's opacity. Now I'm going to create this new one. I'm going to say this is my blur underscore intensity. Say okay. And currently, if I double click this, I'm going to have quite a lot of stuff here. So let's just go ahead and dunk this in my waves group. Right. Currently, it's all grouped, and we're going to have to start obviously renaming these. So this is going to be my waves mask blurriness. I'll just say blur. All right. We can even add a description if it's really that important. By people can hover. For example, should a mask be present? Change the blurriness. Okay. And then we've got next suspect, which is invert position, and simply, well, it's fairly simple, invert position for the mask, but let's just say, actually, I probably don't need my invert position. It simply grabs the slider, but let's just say, okay, invert position. So invert blend mask. If the waves, if there is a mask, invert it. Then we've got our waves histogram contrast, which is our, I believe, histogram here. So I'm going to say this is my, well, how should I call this really? Mask position, or in this case, visibility. Change if there is a mask, if there is, of course you could use the visible if, by the way, which is pretty cool, and you can hook this up to a different thing, such as, you know, have a boolean which would enable these, for example, you know, use a blend mask or whatever. What I'm going to say, if there, obviously this requires a little bit of programming, and like I said, I'm not going to do this in Designer. I want to go over this in Unreal, but definitely if you know what you're doing or you want to just try this, just check out you know, the documentation or whatever and figure out how to do this on your own. And if you want to do the visible if bit, I believe it had some interesting, such as like input has to be, for example, named like in this case mask or something or whatever we named it, and then if it's equal to true or something like that, right, it will actually perform this, whatever. That's probably, I think that was the syntax. I'm not entirely sure, so I have to again check the documentation. Anyway, where was I? If there is a mask, change the visibility. Well, there is a mask. This is the visibility of the mask. Okay, change the visibility of the mask. Very simple. And then we've got our waves histogram position. Oh God, did I just do that on the contrast? God damn it. So the contrast itself really doesn't do that much if you think about it. So I'm just gonna say, where's my mask visibility? I'm just gonna simply copy this and put it in my position. And I'm gonna copy this and put it in my label. I'm gonna say that this is actually my mask contrast. I'm going to say that this is change mask contrast. If there is a mask, of course. If there is a mask, please. There we go. If there is a mask, change mask contrast. Jesus Christ, my hands are not listening to me today at all. All right. Now I believe we have everything set up. Really, there's really not that many more controls to be done. We've got the two blend modes, which is our wave opacity and the blend mode of a wave. Then we got our wave positions. Oh, we got wave tiling. So let's just call this wave count. I'm gonna call this basically, well, there's really no need for a description for here, right? There's no point. Then you've got your waves position, rotation. What is that now? All right, this is the gradient position. So I'm gonna say that this is my sort of apex position. Apex position. I'm gonna say changes the location of the apex on the wave. Simple, easy, and understandable. And then of course rotation. I'm gonna call this wave rotation. Simple. And of course we've got, well, that's pretty much it, right? Mask visibility, etc., etc. This is done now. Let's take a look at our sand, and we should have everything that we definitely need here. We've got our wave opacity, which allows us to use, let's say in this case we want to use the mask. Let's take a look at where our mask is, mask visibility. We don't want to use any mask visibility, and this time if we max this out, we should use our, there it is, right? This is the way we're going to use the mask. Then we're going to use the mask contrast, maybe get a better result. Although this doesn't do much, doesn't it? Quite unfortunate, really. Mask contrast doesn't do jack shit, so forget about that. We can invert it, by the way, which is pretty cool. And then we could use, let's say, how much blur we want on our mask. We should also increase the timing here. For some reason, I'm not really getting an update here, even though I'm blurring the shit out of this guy. And then maybe we should change the apex position. There's our apex position being changed, allowing us to do this, of course, also in real time, by the way. So I'm going to leave this at wherever this is right now. I could max this out on one side, so this is kind of like a flowing, but this creates a little bit of a problem. Maybe I should clamp this to 0.9, but whatever. Let's just use this at whatever it is. Then we can increase the wave count, right? This is also working just nicely. There's our wave count. I'm going to leave it at 5. Then we've got our blending mode, which, like I said, I was happy with my initial blending mode, which I don't know what this is. I think this is screen or whatever. And like I said, this is pretty much legit, right? Even over here, generally speaking, we're not really, we're pretty good. That is as much as I want this to be looking. So generally speaking, I'm done. Okay, and in fact, I kind of bypassed my whole sand full bit. So perhaps I kind of overkilled it, but we could also work here, you know, as well. So we could, let's say, grab our waves again over here and use the grayscale to be outputted over here. However, like I said, kind of overkill for what we're doing, since generally speaking, this is where you would want to blend your materials, right? You want to be blending your materials here and then simply outputting whatever it is you've got here on these outputs. In this case, though, I don't want to bother with that, since I only, like, that's all I really need, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and simply delete this entire graph. Remove this graph. Yes, I want to remove these elements. And I'm simply going to grab my sand and put it in my package. This is going to be my main sort of package right now. Kind of need to, like, organize the damn thing. So this is my sand, and we're pretty much done with whatever it is we need to do. The only difference, of course, is that we don't have controls for our sand on its own. So that's a little bit of a problem, isn't it? Not to mention that we kind of have to change the outputs now, since we do need to compute these outputs. Now, that being said, I believe we're pretty much done. There's really, look, there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of stuff we could do, right? First of all, let's take a look at how this thing performs in the first place. If we take a look at our resources, well, I need to link something here, which would be a 3D mesh. Grab the terrain and have my terrain here, then dunk it here, and we could see the outputs in 3D view and see how this is going to look like. Look, I'm pretty happy with this, all right? Generally speaking, that's a little bit maybe too coarse, or maybe my actual, oh, I need to set my scale a little bit higher, something like this. And yeah, I could work a lot on these, I could work on these sort of, you know, waves, and I could get a lot better waves out of it. Or maybe I could break them apart. And definitely speaking, generally for my for my beach, I would want to break them apart, and I will probably do this off screen, since my guess is the process is already very well understood, hopefully by you guys, since I've been just going on and on about how to get this and that done, and really I have no idea myself. Like I said, I'm not that good at making a design and then just having something off the top of my head. I really just don't even properly understand the blending modes. I mean, I do have an idea, but I never really look at which blending mode I'm using. I'm just scrolling across them to see which one I like most. Something I need to rectify probably in the future. And I do recommend you learn them yourself, at least know what they do, such as multiply, which just multiplies the values at the bottom of the top. It basically gets darker. But the point is that I'm happy enough with this, and maybe I could also mask this out later down the line in Painter, so that, let's say, the players will be playing over here. We don't want this to have this sort of wavy texture, so I could perhaps even add a mask onto the wave itself or before the wave, so maybe a gradient, right? Let's see how this actually will look like. Let's actually not. Okay, let's forget it. This is going to take another probably 5 to 10 minutes. There's no point of continuing. I believe this is the end of this video. I've done pretty much everything that you might need to do. I've showed you how to use an input and an output for a function. Clearly, of course, I did not. Obviously, you can set up a particular one if we go into my waves here. Obviously, my output currently does not have a definition, so it's kind of like just a floating grayscale, and kind of my label and description is shit. But if I go ahead and add an item, I could use it for a particularly important thing. For example, a mask. Maybe I want to output a mask, which you can use for something else later down the line. So definitely don't think that you can only output channels. You can output a lot of different things. And like I said, if there is nothing that you can, say that it's being used for, not to mention you can add several usages. But if that's the case, you can just say, well, you know what, fuck it. There won't be any definition. Of course, in this case, you can also add different visibilities with all the conditions here set up. Right? So, with that being said, guys, I'm going to basically cut this short. Not short, but I'm going to cut this video off because there's really not much else to say. In the next video, I will have probably either touched this up or not touched up at all. We'll actually export it. Wait. Don't leave. There's one more thing. Jesus, I almost forgot. We need to expose these parameters as well, because you see, these exact same parameters won't be visible to the user once we export. Okay, like we expose these, but they're only available for whoever is using them inside, since currently this is kind of like, this is not a full substance. So we need to expose these to the to basically promote them higher up the chain. So I'm basically going to expose all of them, with the possible exception of I thought there was a way to basically all. I'm going to expose all of them with a possible exception with a few. For example, maybe I don't need my contrast. Like, this is not really going to do much. Well, blend mode I do need. The opacity, rotation count, visibility is good. Invert, blend mask. Didn't really do much last time, so I'm just not going to do it and to introduce it. And then the blur here, I'm going to leave it just in case I get something, something interesting. I'm not even going to bother with these, but I'm going to say waves control here. Important. Waves. Wave control. Well, generally, actually, no need. Fuck it. No need, because we're going to have sand as well. So this is our wave. Currently, it's been promoted. Everything currently here is right now on the outside of our map. By the way, if we took one thing here in the waves as well, forgot to say, in the input images, of course, you can see an input grayscale. So whenever you got something here, just make sure that you've got an output whenever you have an input, because otherwise there's no point. Then we've got a sand here, and we need to expose some parameters for our sand. First of all, I would like to expose perhaps actually nothing. I don't want to expose anything from the sand. There's really nothing I can expose here. With the possible exception of this histogram, which will allow me to kind of change the roughness and metallic bit out of it. But then, this is kind of like a cheat version. I would probably have to create another histogram here. But let's go ahead and create the metallic roughness. This will allow us to kind of add watery feel to it. So I'm going to expose these parameters as well. I'm going to say sand. If we didn't have one, we definitely have one now. And in my parameters here, so I double click, I will say that this is my range. Well, probably should have done metallic. Oh wait, no. Metallic roughness. Oh yeah, I forgot that this doesn't take special characters. Now I should call this, by the way, sort of range metal or rough. Well, both. This should allow me to create add a special character. Yes, these have special characters. And over here, my second one, which would be my position, I should say this is my sort of metal. Let's call it rough. I'm going to say this is my sort of position. Metal rough. Right? I could add some description. For example, this changes the position of the thing, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Of course, you could use something else, but this changes. Let's say this changes histogram for the metallic, and so for the roughness and the inverted sort of grayscale for the metal. I'm gonna copy this over to the other one. The reason I'm really writing these down is because like 6 or 7 months down the line, you're really not gonna know what the fuck we're thinking here. All right. So these are my kind of input parameters done. I will see these in Unreal once I kind of export this. So let's just save this out. I already have my project created here. Substance. I'm gonna call this, well, sand. So save this, and there we go. We're done. Oops, my bad. I kind of created a bunch of screenshots. So yeah, definitely no need to go gung-ho about the screenshots. But as you can see, there's loads of different applications. On your end, I recommend you just sort of don't go too granular. Okay, just get something that works for you, because you can spend a lot of time in Designer and get nothing as a result, or a really good result depending on how good you are. Okay, that's been all, guys. I've really spent quite a long time. I think has been about maybe a 2-hour video, not a 2-hour, but a fairly long video. But I think I've gotten over everything that you need to know in order to operate the software on its own. Okay, there's really nothing I can think about that. Obviously, these are going to be exposed by default. Also, God damn it. Forgot you need to make this relative to parent. Oh, it is already. Okay, that's great. Because you know, ideally if you're working with absolute. Actually, let's increase the resolution here to, I don't know, parent heads x32. Let's take a look. Yeah, this kind of looks interesting. Maybe not the best. Maybe I would have to actually go ahead and dive into here, but it does create sort of a strange setup. So whatever. Obviously. This is maybe 4K at 1. Parent 0. There we go. This I believe this is the default one, is it? 256. Whatever. The point is that we're done right now, and I'm not going to go further with this. All right. So save your thing. Control S, and that is the end of that. All right, guys. That's it. Bye bye.